In a surprising move, President Trump nominates Mike Waltz, his former national security advisor, to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host.
Welcome to Sekulow on this Friday. And if you joined us yesterday, you heard us talk a lot about National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who would be departing the White House. And there was some curious language about this because he's Trump's national security advisor. He was caught up in the Signalgate kind of scandal that the media was pushing so hard. And some of the language early in the day said Mike Waltz to depart the White House. Then some people maybe suggested it was fired, but depart, we thought was kind of a curious word used there. And then as it developed, we now know the reason he's departing. He's not necessarily being fired or forced out. He's moving to a different position. And this is actually a position that requires Senate confirmation. If you'll remember, Elise Stefanik, who was originally nominated to be the ambassador to the United Nations, withdrew her nomination at the request of the president because of the concern about losing another seat in the House. But there was someone who had already resigned from the House who was in the Trump administration, and that was the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. He has now been nominated by the president to be the next ambassador to the UN. So this will require confirmation hearings. This will take some time before this is official. But I'm going to read for you what President Trump put out yesterday afternoon about this after all the media was in a tizzy about what was going on. And the logic seemed to be that he was forced out. And even my analysis here was that it was probably to kind of shift or distract from the attacks that the left was perpetrating against the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. But here's what President Trump had to say. I'm pleased to announce that I will be nominating Mike Waltz to be the next United States ambassador to the United Nations. From his time in uniform on the battlefield, in Congress, and as my national security advisor, Mike Waltz has worked hard to put our nation's interests first. I know he will do the same in his new role. In the interim, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as National Security Advisor while continuing his strong leadership at the State Department. Together, we will continue to fight tirelessly to make America and the world safe again. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So we've learned quite a bit from this. Now we know that this wasn't a firing or an ouster or even him leaving the administration. He's just moving to a different role, and he will now have to go through confirmation. There is a very strong role, and I think it's important to have a strong individual like Mike Waltz. He's a former Green Beret, has served, has some national security chops. Obviously, he was a national security advisor. Now he will fill that role at the UN, which we were very saddened when Elise Stefanik was not going to be in that role. She's very strong for Israel, a good friend of this broadcast. But we understood also what she was asked to do to remain in the House to kind of keep that majority intact for now. But now we see Mike Waltz moving there. And I think this is an interesting note as well, that Marco Rubio will be the acting national security advisor, or at least an interim position, which makes sense also. He's a Secretary of State. National security is very much in what he does as Secretary of State, and advising the president on this during the interim time, I think, will go smoothly. There won't be a hiccup. But we will keep you updated as we see what comes next and who that non-interim position will be. We'll tell you as well. We've got a great show ahead, folks, as we take a look at this week, all the action the ACLJ has done, even looking at those judges that have been arrested for obstructing or harboring illegal immigrants. We've got a lot ahead, but we also thank you if you participated in our April Life and Liberty Drive. We couldn't continue this work without you. Stay tuned, and we'll talk to you after this break.
whirlwind Friday for Judge Hannah Dugan, publicly handcuffed and arrested at her workplace.
Judge Dugan is charged with obstruction and concealing the individual from arrest.
The 31-year-old had a deportation order and was facing domestic abuse charges, to which he pleaded not guilty. The FBI says Judge Dugan instructed Flores Ruiz to leave through a, quote, back door of the courtroom.
But if you assume that everything the government is alleging is true, then yeah, this is a pretty strong case. The judge went way out of her way, not only to, not help apprehend this guy, but to guide him out of the courtroom in a way that would avoid the agents without informing the government attorney what she was doing.
A statement released on Friday on behalf of Judge Dugan says she will defend herself vigorously and that she looks forward to being exonerated.
Anyone who is breaking the law or obstructing federal law enforcement officials from doing their jobs is putting themselves at risk of being prosecuted.
A state judge doesn't have the right, just like you and I don't have the right, Trace, to pick and choose what federal laws we want to obey and which ones we don't.
There's a trend here that you've probably noticed. Sanctuary cities have now morphed into rogue sanctuary judges. These sanctuary policies encourage judges to do the kinds of things that Judge Hannah has done.
You can sit aside and watch. You can argue against us all you want and protest all you want. But when you cross that line, and I've said this 1,000 times, when you cross that line to impediment or knowingly harboring, concealing an illegal alien from ICE, you will be prosecuted.
If this judge can harbor an illegal alien who is validly sought for arrest by federal officials, why doesn't she also have the right to conceal Luigi Manzoni, the killer? Why doesn't she have the right to conceal drug dealers and drug cartel mafia members? There's no right of any of us to say we're going to pick and choose which federal laws we're going to obey and which ones not. She has to obey all of them.
Welcome back to Sekulow. Phone lines are open for you, by the way, at 1-800-684-3110. I want you to join us on air because we are going through a lot of great content today. I also want to hear from you. How do you feel about the work of the ACLJ? Do you feel like we are doing the work that you want us to do? What could we do? What topics could we cover? What would you like to see? And also, if you have any good words of encourament, words of prayer, break down some of this breaking news with this judge that's he's facing felony charges in Wisconsin for... it almost sounds comical, like we're making light of it. And you only are making light of it because she was caught so quickly and because it happened so fast. And this is what's happening. And there's a bit of ridiculousness that comes from these kind of moments in our society.
That's right. So the immigration officials had, from an authorized immigration official, found probable cause to believe that Flores Ruiz was removable from the United States and issued a warrant for his arrest. So they're going through the process. And upon his arrest, he would be given notice of intent decision to reinstate a prior order, which is removal from the United States because he had been previously deported. And then he would have an opportunity to contest the determination by making a written or oral statement to an immigration officer. So this wasn't someone that was being picked up and a part of Tren de Aragua or MS-13 and going to be put on a flight to El Salvador. This is normal immigration enforcement process. So it's not even something that the judge could have an issue with saying, there's these injunctions against policies, or anything. Yeah. This is normal process of someone who had already been deported and was before her court for very serious criminal charges. And they even make note.
Again, not criminal charges that are just immigration related.
Right.
Actually, not immigration related. We're talking
offenses
about
within the United States.
Yeah, violent crime within the United States is the charges that were why he was there in the room.
And they even say that when they're going to these courthouse issues, they say this within this charging document, that they don't go to family court issues or civil court issues. They only use the courthouse as the venue when they know someone is there for a criminal charge. So just that fact alone. But they went through the entire process here. The immigration officials talked with the sheriff's department, who's in charge of keeping the courthouse safe. They talked with clerks and administrators at the courthouse to make sure everything was in line. And they also say they do this, especially with criminal offenses many times, where they will pick up someone for arrest because it's safer for the arresting officers, for the individual, for the people around, because they know that person's coming through security. They're not going to be armed. There's not going to be an issue that could escalate further and cause violence or harm to other people. So this is a routine thing they do when they have the information that someone that they are after, that they have a warrant for, is going to be in the court. Now, they went there. They spoke with people at the court. The clerk said, can you please wait to do the arrest until after his case has gone through its hearing? So don't obstruct our state process. Let that play out before. And they agreed. So these agents are there. There's people from ICE. There's Border Patrol. There are FBI agents. And they wait. And then the attorney for this individual goes and tells the judge, there's ICE agents out there.
This part is where it turns to the point of absurdity.
And they say that she got visibly angry in the courtroom, called the clerk over, and then she went outside and confronted them, visibly angry, many witnesses said, and said, you have to go. She said, do you have a warrant, a judicial warrant? No, I have an administrative warrant, which is what an immigration warrant would be.
Would have, yeah.
And she says, no, you have to have a judicial warrant to do this here. You need to go talk to the chief judge. So they say, okay, they're obliging and everything. They are trying to keep this calm and do this by the book. They go to the chief judge's office. One of the agents that was there, because they were all plain clothes, was not a part of that discussion and was on the other side of the hall. Watched her then go look around for other agents to make sure they're all gone. Goes back in the courtroom, confers with the attorney of this defendant, takes him through, she summons him over, takes him through the jury chamber, and then directs him, and that's all non-public areas, so they can't do an arrest there. Takes him, gets him through a different exit. Then after they talk to the chief judge, and he says, you may make arrests within the public areas. This is fine. They then go back out. They see him going through another door, very Scooby-Doo, as you mentioned, that was not directly behind that courtroom of Judge Dugan. And then they pursue him in a foot chase and end up catching him. And they have all this very matter of minutes. As you said, it wasn't even successful, but she orchestrated this elaborate distraction. Yeah. Go talk to the chief
Without
judge.
The other, by the way, didn't we find out also that the people on the other side of the case, I don't know, the lawyers of the people who were potentially, allegedly beaten, including a man and a woman that were beaten by this guy, weren't involved in this, weren't told.
Right. So the lawyer for the defendant was talking, having this sidebar with the judge, but the lawyer for the state's attorney, was told none of this, and all of a sudden is like, where's the defendant? And the clerk goes, oh, the judge has informed me that his proceedings have been adjourned for the day. And he's like, well, why didn't you tell me any of this? Yeah. Also, the victims are here, and the victim advocate was there, and still this judge thought she had the authority, this arrogance, to say, you know what? I don't care about the law anymore. I don't like what the administration is doing with this immigration stuff. I've already told people if they're scared to come in my courtroom, you don't have to come into court. You can come into Zoom. That I'm going to subvert the law. That's where people lose faith in our institutions.
Yeah, I want to take this call. Scotty's calling because I think he's asking the question that certainly I'm asking, which is essentially, why are you risking your life, your career over someone who is, again, this is not, oh, your favorite family man who came over, who brought his family through, and they're being deported. And there's a lot of heart there. I understand those. I understand having a heart for people who need help. But when it's talking about somebody who their alleged crime is beating a woman who is his roommate and another man, this is why risk it all? And Scotty, go ahead.
Yeah, just that. What kind of tie does this judge have with this illegal immigrant, whether it's relational or monetary, that she would put her life in jeopardy for this guy? Doesn't make sense.
I think it could mean, look, there's a lot of obviously corruption that goes on, but there's obviously the sort of, you don't want to say it, but the Trump derangement syndrome that breaks people down. I've seen a lot of good friends get broken down by this. And look, sometimes I understand it's tough, but if you're a judge, a sitting judge, in Wisconsin or anywhere in this country, you still have a job to do, and you got to do it. And your responsibility as an American isn't to do this.
Well, and there's a question coming in from YouTube. This is Patrick that asks, how do these people get appointed in the first place? Well, this is a state court. This person's elected. This person is elected by the people of Wisconsin. So she will have a reelection, which we'll see how that plays out, if she's even still able to serve as a judge because of a conviction or things of that nature. But that's what you're looking at here. These state court judges are elected by people, and then they feel like they have the utmost authority. Now, they do have a lot of authority when it comes to the courtroom and making decisions and interpreting the law. But that doesn't give them the right to take the law into their own hands. This wasn't even some excuse she could come up with that there's an injunction, which we'll talk about those injunctions in the next segment.
Yep, absolutely.
But there's this injunction in place, and so I was concerned he was going to be put on a plane to El Salvador. No, this was a warrant that was valid. Someone who'd already been deported and still violated that and came back, and she ignored it. You can't ignore the law. That's the famous thing from Letitia James, where she said, no one's above the law when going after President Trump. They think that they are above the law, and you know what? You're not, and you can get arrested for that.
And that's what's happening right now. Look, in 1 minute, we're going to be back. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, my dad, Jay Sekulow, is going to be joining us. But in this next minute that we have on the air with you, it's an important time. You may feel like we are amped up right now. It's because we are.
All right, we'll be back with more right after this break as we break down some of the top analysis and stories of the week, as well as the work of the ACLJ, as we get involved both in local matters, such as people who can't hold a Bible study, or people that are harassed by the police or arrested even and cited for sharing the gospel, or if they are just protesting abortion, standing up for life, but as well as representing the state of West Virginia at the Supreme Court with that brief trying to put an end to these nationwide injunctions by district courts. All that work is possible because of your support through our Life and Liberty Drive that we just completed. And so I want to say thank you to you all for supporting us in that. It's essential to the work we do as we fight to uphold the Constitution and protect the rights of Americans.
Say a prayer for us. Say a prayer for our team. Say a prayer for our country. If you need help, if you need guidance in that, we also have an ACLJ free prayer guide that leads you through some topics and prayers and what you can specifically pray for our team and for the issues that matter to us the most. And that's at aclj.org/pray. Again, phone lines are open for you at 1-800-684-3110. And a lot of you are watching, and I want to hear from you. The driveways to the White House covered in signs. These signs, basically mugshots of all of the different people that have been arrested that were here illegally. And these are people who had incredibly violent pasts. These are not just people who were here illegally. These are people who have, a lot of them even committed murder.
That's right. So this was 100-yard signs that had the mugshots of individuals that were taken off the streets and what they were described as the worst of the worst by the administration. And not only did they put up this theatrical show for everyone where it shows what the criminal offense was and that they were arrested, but there was a surprise early morning press briefing from Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary at the White House. This is very unusual to have an early morning press briefing.
Yeah, before most of you probably were awake or at work, this was happening.
And this was with Tom Homan, and it was to highlight the success of the actions taken by the Trump administration on the border. And we'll play a clip here. Yeah. This is her opening line.
Later this afternoon, President Trump will sign an executive order on law and order and another executive order on sanctuary cities. The first EO will strengthen and unleash America's law enforcement to pursue criminals and protect innocent citizens. The second EO is centered around protecting American communities from criminal aliens, and it will direct the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security to publish a list of state and local jurisdictions that obstruct the enforcement of federal immigration laws. After these are signed, the president will have signed more than 140 executive orders already, rapidly approaching the total number signed by the Biden administration over the course of 4 years in office.
She stated, with today we kick off our 100-day week with a focus on the president's historic effort to secure our southern border. Welcome back to Sekulow. Phone lines are open for you. I want to hear from you at 1-800-684-3110. We also know a bunch of you are joining us live on YouTube right now, so I encourage you, if you haven't yet, hit that thumbs up. It really does help us get into more people's feeds and get this message out there right now. My dad, Jay Sekulow, Chief Counsel for the ACLJ, is joining us right now. Dad, obviously you and the team have been hard at work, but there are some interesting new cases that are coming out of the ACLJ.
Let me just start. We are representing the state of West Virginia. So the ACLJ is counsel to a state, challenging these district court judges that are issuing nationwide injunctions against the executive order signed by President Trump. Now, the problem is a district court's jurisdiction is supposed to be very narrow, very limited to the locale where they're sitting. That's not the case that has happened now with President Trump. So here's what's going on. There's an emergency stay at the Supreme Court of the United States. We worked on this brief through the weekend and are ready to file it momentarily, hopefully. And it will, in fact, be, I think, the key brief on limiting the jurisdictions of these U.S. district courts that are instead of issuing their injunction covering, say, the Northern District of New York, they issue an injunction covering the entire country, even though they only sit in the jurisdiction for Northern New York. It has to stop. When we talk about law and order, when we talk about separation of powers, what's the president's authority, what's the judiciary's, the one thing the judiciary cannot be is a policymaker. But a lot of these judges have taken that element. And the answer to that at the Supreme Court needs to be, you can't do that. So we are front and center on that. Like I said, very significantly, and you'll have more details on it tomorrow, we are representing the state of West Virginia in this cause of action. We've got a lot of other cases breaking right now, but I want to spend some time on this, Logan, because it's the implications are very significant.
No, it's a big day. We're also going to have some friends from West Virginia joining us, so it's going to be a great show. You want to make sure you tune in for that. But Will.
Yeah, this is just, obviously this is an issue everyone has been paying attention to and concerned about, but I think it's important to reiterate that at the ACLJ, we watch and we find the appropriate time to file in something like this so that we can make the strongest impact. That sometimes we want that immediate, how can we fight back? But this is the example of the ACLJ hard at work, finding the right avenue, the right representation to go after something that is an issue that I know that our listeners and members at the ACLJ are very, very concerned about, and this happens to be that moment.
Yeah, it is, Will. And let me talk to our ACLJ members and our ACLJ champions especially. Let me tell you this. This case is the repercussions, the reason we've gotten involved so aggressively and so quickly. This case has huge ramifications. I mean, gigantic ramifications. When you elect a president, they're supposed to be able to work through their executive authorities without a court doing what these courts have been doing. And they've been doing it pretty much without stop. Now, the Supreme Court has got this application. They've asked for a briefing. So it's going to move in days here. So I want everybody to understand this. But we have to fight back on this because what you have is an unelected judge somewhere in the country to issue with the stroke of a pen an order to stop the administration policy for the entire country. And then you ask yourself, well, why can't they stop that for foreign policy as well? And the answer is, under these judges' interpretation, they have authority to do anything. The answer has to be no. So, it's one thing that the government's fighting it, but now the states are fighting it. And I said, we're in a very unique situation, folks, and we are fighting back aggressively. I want to say also something to our ACLJ champions. We couldn't do this without you. We appreciate it so much. Also, to our ACLJ members, so continue to support the work of the ACLJ. Maybe you can become an ACLJ champion, and we could use your support in a big way. These cases are, look, the one thing you know is these cases are complex, and they're different than what we've done in the past because they're moving at a different pace. So our Supreme Court team is fully engaged. I'm making sure that we're moving forward on these. Jordan is as well. And I'm very optimistic on where it goes. It's going to take some time, but like I said, the time on this, Logan and Will, is going to be days, not months on this one.
All right, we'll keep updated on that. And that's precisely when you'll hear from people like my dad, my brother, when there is really important, incredible things they need to come on and share. Obviously, Will and I are always going to be sharing the updates on the ACLJ. We're going to have on some of our incredible legal team that's here in studio, Harry Hutchinson or CeCe Heil. We're going to have a lot of those people always on this broadcast. We have great guests coming in. But know that everyone is hard at work. The ACLJ team is in full action. I think when you have a case like this, Dad, in West Virginia, it can get a little lost in what we're doing. When you look at what we're doing on a local level, like we said, we'll talk about, the grandmother who can't hold a Bible study. But on a bigger scale, the ACLJ can still get involved on these really world-changing, if not just America-changing laws that are happening right now as they battle against this administration.
No, you're absolutely right, Logan. And let me take it. You talk about like the Bible study can't happen in HOA. So what if a court rules against us in a case like that and issues a nationwide injunction banning Bible studies from happening in neighborhoods? Now, that sounds absurd, but it's the same principle of when these judges don't have jurisdiction, they think they can, without limits, do whatever they want. So the answer has to be no. The way you handle this is not by just speaking and talking about it, which is important. You have to litigate it, and that's why we're honored to be representing West Virginia. But it applies to any case. So this case involving jurisdiction is critical to moving things forward. We have to win this. It may take additional briefing. We'll see how it goes. But like I said, it's moving very, very quick.
And we'll keep everybody updated on that. And look, we got 2 minutes left in this segment. And this some of you lose us here. It's the first half hour. The show is wrapping up. If you feel engaged, empowered, you hear what we're doing here, and you want to get involved, this incredible team that we're able to put together and get hard at work. Because remember, the ACLJ, we do this show, and we also do incredible amounts of great media content, but we also are on the front lines of the legal battles. I believe those go hand in hand. We have to have support for both. And you need to support both. And when you support the ACLJ, it does that. It supports our media team here. Like I said, if you look just beyond this camera, you'd see dozens of people that are working on this show right now to make sure we're on the air. And of course, we have our legal team, some right here in studio, some in Washington, D.C., and others around the world, some in places you don't even get to know about because of how incredible their work is and how brave some of this media team and this legal team is.
All right, we'll be back with more right after this break as we break down some of the top analysis and stories of the week, as well as the work of the ACLJ as we get involved both in local matters, such as people who can't hold a Bible study or people that are harassed by the police or arrested even and cited for sharing the gospel, or if they are just protesting abortion, standing up for life, but as well as representing the state of West Virginia, the Supreme Court, with that brief, trying to put an end to these nationwide injunctions by district courts. All that work is possible because of your support through our Life and Liberty Drive that we just completed. And so I want to say thank you to you all for supporting us in that. It's essential to the work we do as we fight to uphold the Constitution and protect the rights of Americans.
Say a prayer for us. Say a prayer for our team. Say a prayer for our country. If you need help, if you need guidance in that, we also have an ACLJ free prayer guide that leads you through some topics and prayers and what you can specifically pray for our team and for the issues that matter to us the most. And that's at aclj.org/pray. Again, phone lines are open for you at 1-800-684-3110. And a lot of you are watching, and I want to hear from you.
Welcome to the all-new ACLJ app. Expert analysis and insight big tech can't censor. Customize your news and get real-time alerts on the issues you care about. Advocacy is now at your fingertips. Take action, make a difference. Support the causes you care about with just one tap. Be the first to know. Breaking news alerts sent straight to your inbox. Everything you need, all in one place. Stay informed, stay empowered. Download today.
We are so excited to announce the ACLJ's brand new app, completely redesigned to provide you with the best tools available to partner with us at the ACLJ. You can watch the daily Sekulow program, sign the petitions, customize your ACLJ membership experience, donate with the click of a button, and receive up-to-the-minute critical updates that the mainstream media can't censor. Just scan the QR code on your screen or go to your phone's app store, search ACLJ, and click install. It's that simple.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host.
Welcome to Sekulow on this Friday. And if you joined us yesterday, you heard us talk a lot about National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who would be departing the White House. And there was some curious language about this because he's Trump's national security advisor. He was caught up in the Signalgate kind of scandal that the media was pushing so hard. And some of the language early in the day said Mike Waltz to depart the White House. Then some people maybe suggested it was fired, but depart, we thought was kind of a curious word used there. And then as it developed, we now know the reason he's departing. He's not necessarily being fired or forced out. He's moving to a different position. And this is actually a position that requires Senate confirmation. If you'll remember, Elise Stefanik, who was originally nominated to be the ambassador to the United Nations, withdrew her nomination at the request of the president because of the concern about losing another seat in the House. But there was someone who had already resigned from the House who was in the Trump administration, and that was the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. He has now been nominated by the president to be the next ambassador to the UN. So this will require confirmation hearings. This will take some time before this is official. But I'm going to read for you what President Trump put out yesterday afternoon about this after all the media was in a tizzy about what was going on. And the logic seemed to be that he was forced out. And even my analysis here was that it was probably to kind of shift or distract from the attacks that the left was perpetrating against the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. But here's what President Trump had to say. I'm pleased to announce that I will be nominating Mike Waltz to be the next United States ambassador to the United Nations. From his time in uniform on the battlefield, in Congress, and as my national security advisor, Mike Waltz has worked hard to put our nation's interests first. I know he will do the same in his new role. In the interim, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as National Security Advisor while continuing his strong leadership at the State Department. Together, we will continue to fight tirelessly to make America and the world safe again. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So we've learned quite a bit from this. Now we know that this wasn't a firing or an ouster or even him leaving the administration. He's just moving to a different role, and he will now have to go through confirmation. There is a very strong role, and I think it's important to have a strong individual like Mike Waltz. He's a former Green Beret, has served, has some national security chops. Obviously, he was a national security advisor. Now he will fill that role at the UN, which we were very saddened when Elise Stefanik was not going to be in that role. She's very strong for Israel, a good friend of this broadcast. But we understood also what she was asked to do to remain in the House to kind of keep that majority intact for now. But now we see Mike Waltz moving there. And I think this is an interesting note as well, that Marco Rubio will be the acting national security advisor, or at least an interim position, which makes sense also. He's a Secretary of State. National security is very much in what he does as Secretary of State. And advising the president on this during the interim time, I think, will go smoothly. There won't be a hiccup. But we will keep you updated as we see what comes next and who that non-interim position will be. We'll tell you as well. We've got a great show ahead, folks, as we take a look at this week, all the action the ACLJ has done, even looking at those judges that have been arrested for obstructing or harboring illegal immigrants. We've got a lot ahead, but we also thank you if you participated in our April Life and Liberty Drive. We couldn't continue this work without you. It was a critical month, and we appreciate ACLJ members and champions who stood with us during that Life and Liberty Drive. We'll be right back with more on Sekulow. Stay tuned, and we'll talk to you after this break.
Clash with the federal court system has been intensifying.
The one thing the judiciary cannot be is a policymaker. But a lot of these judges have taken that element. And the answer to that at the Supreme Court needs to be, you can't do that.
There is a concerted effort by the far left to judge shop, to pick judges who are clearly acting as partisan activists from the bench.
We are representing the state of West Virginia, challenging these district court judges that are issuing nationwide injunctions against the executive order signed by President Trump. There's an emergency stay at the Supreme Court of the United States, and it will, in fact, be a key brief on limiting the jurisdictions of these U.S. district courts that are, instead of issuing their injunction covering, say, the Northern District of New York, they issue an injunction covering the entire country, even though they only sit in the jurisdiction for Northern New York.
The White House is arguing voters chose Trump, not the judges.
A single district court judge out of 700 cannot set policy for the entire nation, let alone on national security and public safety issues.
This case has huge ramifications, gigantic ramifications. We have to fight back on this because what you have is an unelected judge somewhere in the country can issue with the stroke of a pen an order to stop administration policy for the entire country. Then you ask yourself, well, why can't they stop that for foreign policy as well? And the answer is, under these judges' interpretation, they have authority to do anything.
In Trump's first term, there were 64 national injunctions issued against him. 64. In Obama's entire term, only 12. So you can see where this is going. We've got to put a stop to it.
We're honored to be representing West Virginia. This case involving jurisdiction is critical to moving things forward.
Welcome back to Sekulow. Again, it is a packed show. My brother Jordan Sekulow is here, and of course, Will Haynes is in studio. But now we're joined by a very special guest, one of our good friends, and also happens to be the Attorney General of West Virginia. Now I'll pitch it to Jordan because I think, Jordan, you need to set up what we're doing here and then introduce our guest today.
Well, people know about this injunction issue. They know it's a huge issue. It involves immigration. It's a huge issue. It involves enforcement by the executive branch of basically carrying out their functions. Usually we're talking about executive agencies and bureaucrats out of control. But now it's our court system. And people, I think, in this first 100 days have said, what are groups going to do? What can West Virginia do? What can the Attorney General do in West Virginia to stop these judges who are issuing orders to affect all of our lives when their jurisdiction is in a district of a state? For instance, in this case, before we go to JB, Maryland, Washington, and Massachusetts are affecting how the federal government is able to carry out its job in West Virginia and nationwide. So let's go to our good friend, JB McCuskey. I always like to say this. General McCuskey, this is, I think, it was a great example of how your team and our team were able to work together in a matter of days to go before the court to honestly put forward what these issues are really about. And it's about these out-of-control judicial, I mean, we talk about judicial activism all the time. We are now seeing it in real time.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting parts of this, Jordan, is, and it was interesting that Logan brought up the confirmation process of district court judges. If we're going to allow district court judges to act like Supreme Court justices, their confirmation proceedings are not going to be like that anymore. And, if you say every president has to appoint, 75 or 100 district court judges, right? If every single one of them takes 3 weeks like a Supreme Court justice, we will run out of judges pretty soon, right? But on a more important note, I think the point here is that district courts are set up under our Constitution to resolve issues and controversy that are in front of them. And what they're now doing is they are resolving constitutional issues where there isn't an actual plaintiff. They are resolving questions that are not designed for their courts to be resolving. And it has really dangerous precedent setting. It almost doesn't matter the topic, right? And to be fair, I don't want Republican judges doing this when there's a Democrat president either, right? The system works beautifully, and it works in the way that our framers set it up. And what our office and what we're so grateful for your help in doing is arguing is that district courts need to get back to what it is that they do. And that is resolving issues in controversy with actual plaintiffs in front of them and leaving the constitutional review that affects every American, not just the Americans that are in their districts, should be left to the Supreme Court.
JB, when you look at this, I'm sorry, Attorney General McCuskey, I'm so used to just calling you JB, but
okay, buddy.
All right, thanks. When you look at this issue, judges were never meant to be policymakers. And what we have effectively now are hundreds, if not thousands, of potential policymakers in the United States that aren't constitutionally equipped to be policymakers. They're not elected. They don't have a mandate from the people to affect policy on the United States. But we're seeing individuals, and you see the percentage, it's like 92% of those that have issued these injunctions against President Trump were appointed by Democrats. You're seeing that they are now carrying out policy of even prior administrations, if you want to take it to that level, by blocking moves that they don't believe, because of their political ideology, should be the policy of the United States. And I think that's what really should hit home with every single American, especially if you did vote for this current president. And even if you didn't, that's not how this works in the United States. And that's one of the main things I think that we, along with the state of West Virginia, are trying to put a stop to.
Yeah, and I think, there's an important distinction to be made here, right? We have a Supreme Court and we have appeals courts for a reason. And that is to determine whether the application of the law to a specific instance was done properly. And when that application of the law is being done improperly, or the law in and of itself is unconstitutional, that is a question for a circuit judge or for the Supreme Court. And what we're finding now is that district court judges, in the interest of expediency, political expediency, are overstepping, in my opinion, their bounds. And what our brief says also, they're overstepping in order to stop things that they find politically untoward, and that isn't their role. And if these things get to the U.S. Supreme Court and those 9 judges make a determination that these Trump executive orders, I don't think that's going to happen. I'm hopeful it doesn't happen, but at least we know that the venue was correct to determine whether or not the federal government's actions were constitutional. That is not in these instances the place of a district court, and it is the place of our circuit courts and our Supreme Court. And they are skipping what is generally the most important step. And the reason why it's so important is that's where you build the record so that the appeals courts can start to understand the totality of the issue and make an informed decision about the policy that they're reviewing.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, because these cases had no trials. And when I say trials, I mean they weren't fully briefed. They weren't fully before the court. These were injunctions issued that then can what they tried to do is stop the executive branch for carrying out its lawful duties, how they interpret laws that have been passed by your elected officials, by Congress, to empower the executive branch to carry out those laws. And a judge in a random district says, I don't agree with the interpretation of the executive branch on how to carry out this law. Now, just to put into example, this is not normal, JB. 67% of all federal injunctions issued by these courts have been against President Trump. That is in the history of the United States of America. 67%. And then you have to get into the politics. Unfortunately, we know when we talk about judicial activism, politics plays a role. 92% of those were issued by Democratic appointed judges. And you talked about the confirmation process. We want to get back to a place in the United States of America where we aren't politically identifying a district court judge and saying, well, they were appointed by a Democrat, so they're going to be able to stop the President of the United States from carrying out action that officials we elect at the level of Congress, so at your district level, and then at your state level with the Senate, because they don't like the way it's being carried out.
Or they find, a lawyer that they're friends with, or it is a politically. Honestly, I think some of these judges are trying to get famous. And that stinks to say, but I think a lot of these folks love to see their name at the bottom of these rulings, because it makes them feel like they are a part of a process that they don't like. The problem is that they've all sworn an oath. They're all lawyers. They're all good lawyers, or they wouldn't be district court judges, right? And there's a level of importance that they end up feeling for issuing these kind of things. But we don't live in a world of feels, and we don't live in a world of importance. We live in a world of rules, and we live in a world with a Constitution. And we cannot allow this piecemeal system to continue, or it will completely halt all executive actions from now on, and it'll hold it for Democrats too, right? We don't want a world where our judges are doing this either. We're looking for a world where these courts have the same function no matter what party the president's in, and the president is allowed to do the things that they're constitutionally asked to in an expedient way. And if those actions do end up crossing a line, we want that process to be heard in the appropriate courts, and that is very clearly the United States Supreme Court, and that is very clearly what's happening now.
And that's why we're headed there, JP. And the ACLJ team has been working with you, working with other people to try to figure out what's our best method here, because we see the outpouring of voices from our audience that says, this is an issue we care about. We didn't even know judges could do this. And of course, there's obviously the nerves of, like you said, what happens when it does go after our smaller cases, our Bible school cases, our Bible study cases, the home churches, all those things that could be easily almost re-weaponized this way. And if we allow this to continue on this way, that is why the ACLJ team has to get involved.
Yes, and we have to do it quickly. So we have to have the resources to be able to work with the team in West Virginia and JB's team, the Attorney General of West Virginia, to represent the people of West Virginia. And JB, I think that's an important note. The final question to you is, we are in a state, you are standing up for all of your constituents to say we are not going to be bound in West Virginia by what a judge decides at the district court level in Maryland. It does not make sense. It is not how our founding fathers decided to set up our judiciary. Based off, we could go through a long history there. This is judicial activism at its worst.
Yeah, and I mean, I live in a state that believes in the Constitution. And so it's easy for me to stand up for my constituents in this way. And thankfully, the way that attorney generals, the way that our offices are set up is that we can represent both our constituents, but we also, when we use the proper channels, which we're using, are able to stand up for people outside of our borders as well. Because we are challenging the constitutionality of actions in the proper format that was delineated by the Constitution. And we're doing it in sort of an ironic way in this instance to fight against people doing it the opposite way.
All right, we'll be back with more right after this break as representing the state of West Virginia at the Supreme Court with that brief trying to put an end to these nationwide injunctions by district courts. All that work is possible because of your support through our Life and Liberty Drive that we just completed. And so I want to say thank you to you all for supporting us in that. It's essential to the work we do as we fight to uphold the Constitution and protect the rights of Americans. We'll be right back with more on Sekulow.
Breaking news this morning, Russian President Vladimir Putin announcing a 3-day ceasefire with Ukraine and calling on Kyiv to do the same. It comes just days after President Trump met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines of Pope Francis's funeral.
Both the White House and Zelensky calling the meeting productive, with the Ukrainian president calling it a very symbolic meeting that has the potential to become historic if we achieve joint results.
I think the meeting went well. We'll see what happens over the next few days. We'll probably learn a lot. I was very disappointed that missiles were flying by Russia, but that missiles were flying. Very disappointing. We'll see how it goes.
It's Russian President Vladimir Putin who Trump is criticizing after a series of deadly bombings on Ukraine's capital of Kyiv. It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently.
There are reasons to be optimistic, but there are reasons to be realistic, of course, as well. We're close, but we're not close enough.
We have the confines of a deal, I believe, and I want him to sign it and be done with it and just go back to life.
What punitive action are you considering taking against Russia?
Well, I have a lot of things I can do. I'm not looking to do it, but I have a lot of strength.
But there are still some specific points, elements of this deal which need to be fine-tuned, and we are busy with this exact process.
Those last couple steps of this journey were always going to be the hardest ones, and it needs to happen soon. We cannot continue, as I said, to dedicate time and resources to this effort if it's not going to come to fruition.
So I think this week they're going to make some decisions based on the evidence, whether Putin is sincere or not, and if not, then likely apply some pressure to get Putin to the point where he will negotiate some peace terms realistically.
Welcome back to Sekulow. Phone lines are jammed right now, but they'll open up at 1-800-684-3110. We're now joined by Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, of course, former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who is joining us right now. And Mike, you have a terrific piece we're going to get into a little bit later on the ACLJ website. But of course, we wanted to kick this off talking about what is going on in Russia and Ukraine. I know someone who's visited. You had over the weekend some meetings between President Trump and Zelensky. And then obviously you had Putin announcing now a 3-day ceasefire with Ukraine starting May 8th, claiming is to celebrate the defeat of Nazi Germany. So the question is, should America and Ukraine see this as a test for Putin, who is obviously famous for breaking these ceasefires? Is this just another show? I want to get your thoughts.
Well, look, the connection to World War II shouldn't escape anyone. President Putin has talked about this for a long time. He always rewrites that history, frankly, in the same way he has tried to rewrite the history with the Soviet Union and Ukraine. I do hope that they're closing in on a solution here. I hope that they're going to get the guns to settle down. President Trump has been working diligently. He's got a team that's been working hard on it. But, the American people get the joke. We all want peace. We want there to be no wars, but we're not prepared to surrender 16,000 kids that the Russians have taken into their country out of Ukraine. We're not willing to give Vladimir Putin the victory of aggression. And that's the rub. That's why we haven't been able to pull this off in the first couple of months of President Trump's time. And I hope this ceasefire for 3 days. I hope it lasts 3 days. He's often announced ceasefires and then not lived up to them. That's also true for the Ukrainians. They've done the same. But I hope he'll live up to it. And then I hope it can be extended. And I hope the Europeans can step forward, provide the resources necessary for a security arrangement in the aftermath of this aggression from Vladimir Putin, and that we can get a solution that is lasting and long-lived in Europe, and we don't have to deal with these issues of thousands of people being lost, innocent civilian lives being lost every month.
Mr. Secretary, one of the big pieces to this that's being reported that a potential peace deal between Ukraine and Russia would involve Crimea remaining under Russian control. Obviously, this is the region that was taken by Vladimir Putin under the Obama administration, really when the beginning of this conflict started. If you want to kind of pinpoint it, then there was some calm for years, and then when Joe Biden took office was the full-fledged attack by the Russians. Where do you think with this potential carrot that's maybe being dangled by the Russians that will accept this deal? This is kind of our sticking point, though. Where do you think Ukraine would land on this? It kind of seems like a very hard sell for Zelensky, but we know that Zelensky met with the president in the Vatican over the weekend, and just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. If that is it a trick by Russia because they know it's not going to be accepted, or what do you make of it?
No, I think actually both of these leaders are very serious about Crimea. It is a pivot point strategically. It's got the important Russian access through Sevastopol and the Russian port there into the Black Sea, which leads out into global trading waters. I think both sides really want this. They want the political control that comes with it. So I think this will actually turn out to be the hardest issue to resolve. But that's what good diplomacy is about. There may well be a solution that looks like something that goes back to pre-2014, where the Russians still have their access to the port, but it is under Ukrainian control. You can imagine that, where the Russians claim it, the Ukrainians claim it, and the United States is agnostic. You could imagine that being a solution. I think that's where President Trump's head is at. I, for one, think it's really important that the United States not acknowledge Russia owning and controlling Ukraine. That's why I made the statement that I did with President Trump's approval back in 2018. I think we have to try to get that right, but we got to bring this conflict to an end. And it's very clear that the Russians have military control of that place today. Very difficult to get it back.
Secretary Pompeo also wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about a piece that you wrote on ACLJ.org called Be Not Afraid. And it really is about having moral clarity, leadership clarity and faith and how it can shape the future. I encourage everyone to go read it. I just did, even right before the show, just to get myself back familiar with it over as you wrote it. It's really a wonderful piece about sort of that mix of faith, morality, when it comes to leadership in our country and in our world. Obviously, it's talking on the heels of the passing of the Pope. And you also mentioned your time watching and observing the previous Pope, or Pope John Paul II. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of time to elaborate on this article and why you think it's important to have that kind of clarity going in to a future.
Thanks for the question. This is why I'm so proud to be part of what the ACLJ is doing. This is right. The ACLJ stands for this exact concept. The central thesis that we know good from evil, we know right from wrong, we know decent people from the inhuman. And what I talked about in that piece was the importance of those of us who are of faith to never walk away from that faith, to always maintain our faith and to try to live our lives that way. And when we lead, when we have institutions for which we're responsible or trying to interact with others in the world, make sure that they understand with absolute clarity the moral principles that we have. It's not that from time to time there aren't practicalities that appear in the world. There are. Talk about what this Pope had done, allowing the Chinese Communist Party to select the bishops in China. I just think they didn't do everything they could have to speak with the power of the Catholic Church in a way that would protect the human dignity of the worshipers inside of China. And so I always tried to do that in my public life, and I hope each of us in our current walks will do the same. Try to live with that moral clarity that we all know is the right thing to do.
Quick final question here. Over the weekend, there was a massive explosion at an Iranian port that just so happened to be coming from fuel that would fuel Iranian ballistic missiles. The Iranians are claiming it was an accident, that it was caused by someone on the ground there. Many people died and were injured in this, but it always has that lingering question in the back of your head. Could it have been some sabotage? Just want to get your take on this real quick.
Easy answers. It could definitely have been some sabotage. I don't know that. I'm not suggesting that it was. There are also chemical accidents that happen all across the world almost every day at some level. So it could have been either. But two things are certain. One, it's great that they're not going to have this fuel for their missile program.
Right.
And the second is, I think this does tell us a lot about the Iranians and their efforts. As we are now engaged in negotiations with the Iranian leadership, these folks are diligently working to build out not only the nuclear weapons, but the missile capability, that is the ability to deliver those weapons not only into the Middle East, but more broadly. And so great caution is required in those negotiations.
Thank you so much, Secretary Pompeo, for joining us today. Hey, everyone who's watching right now, I do encourage you to go read that new article on ACLJ.org.
All right, we'll be back with more right after this break as we break down some of the top analysis and stories of the week, as well as the work of the ACLJ, as we get involved both in local matters, such as people who can't hold a Bible study, or people that are harassed by the police or arrested even and cited for sharing the gospel, or if they are just protesting abortion, standing up for life, but as well as representing the state of West Virginia, the Supreme Court, with that brief trying to put an end to these nationwide injunctions by district courts. All that work is possible because of your support through our Life and Liberty Drive that we just completed. And so I want to say thank you to you all for supporting us in that. It's essential to the work we do as we fight to uphold the Constitution and protect the rights of Americans.
Say a prayer for us. Say a prayer for our team. Say a prayer for our country. If you need help, if you need guidance in that, we also have an ACLJ free prayer guide that leads you through some topics and prayers and what you can specifically pray for our team and for the issues that matter to us the most. And that's at aclj.org/pray.